Hi everybody and welcome back to another video. If you are new here, welcome. My name is Tash. I am the owner of the sewing pattern brand NH Patterns. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you how to sew the heather sweater, which is the sweatshirt that I am wearing now. I will insert a photo here as well. This pattern comes in UK sizes 4 to 32 and is completely free of charge. There's no catch. I'll pop the link to the pattern in the description down below. There is a small mistake in this video where the grain line on the pattern is drawn as like a standard grain line, but I've actually changed it since to what you would find more on a stretch pattern. So the grain line should go around the body rather than straight up and down following the centre front or centre back. Initially, I based this off the fact that all sweatshirt fabric was 4-way stretch, but turns out it is not. It is mostly 4-way stretch, but there is some 2-way stretch as well. So this fabric, for example, which I will link below, is actually only 2-way stretch. So it doesn't really stretch much at the cuffs, or like the neckline doesn't really stretch much. So it is a little bit tight there. Obviously with it being an oversized fit, it still fits well, but it's not as easy to get on and off as some of the other sweatshirts that I made where the fabric was 4-way stretch. I think that's all you need to know, so let's get sewing. To sew this sweatshirt, you only need your main fabric, some scissors, pins and your pattern. For this pattern I'll be using my overlocker to sew, which I'd recommend if you have one, but if not you could use a zigzag stitch on your machine. For your pattern pieces you should have a sleeve, front and back bodice, cuff, neckband and a waistband. Place your front on top of your back with right sides together and match up the shoulders. If you get confused at any point which is the front and which is the back, just remember that the front neckline is lower. The edge of the shoulders will match up perfectly at the armhole edge, but at the neckline edge, the front shoulder may extend slightly past the back. This is done so that when we sew using our 1cm seam allowance, we will be sewing where these pieces intersect and will allow for a smoother curve. Pin in place, then sew using 1cm or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Then press your seam allowances towards the back. If you are using an overlocker like me, I like to increase the number on my differential feed from 1 to 1.5, allowing the machine to pull the fabric through at a slightly faster rate and helping to avoid the fabric stretching. Lay your sweatshirt out with the right side of the fabric facing you so that you are looking at one of the armholes. Take one of your sleeves and with right sides facing, match up the notch of the sleeve with the shoulder seam so that the sleeve extends onto the rest of the sweatshirt. Pin this point, then continue to pin the rest of the sleeve onto the armhole. The edge of the sleeve will extend slightly past the armhole, the same way that the neckline did in the previous step. Pin the sleeve in place, then sew using a 1cm or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Then repeat for the other side. Due to this being a drop shoulder, the front and the back of the sleeve are the same, so it doesn't matter which sleeve you insert on either side as long as you are sewing right sides together. Fold your entire piece right sides together, matching up the side seams of the front and back and the underarm seam of each sleeve. Starting at the hem, pin the sides together and then continue past the armhole seam and pin the underarms of the sleeve together, making sure that the armhole seam allowance is facing towards the sleeve on both sides. Starting at the hem, sew all the way to the cuff of the sleeve using a 1cm or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. You'll be sewing the side seam and underarm seam all in one go. Then repeat for the other side and press your seams towards the back. We'll now move on to finishing all of the edges with the bands and the cuffs. With right sides facing, sew the shorter edge of the waistband together using a 1cm or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance to create a circular piece. Then also sew the short edges of your neckband piece together in the same way. For your cuff pieces, sew the longer raw edge together with right sides facing and repeat for your other cuff piece. We'll start with just our neckband piece. If you are using an overlocker, we need to press our seam allowance, but to reduce bulk, we will press half of the seam allowance one way and half the other. You don't need to snip into your seam allowance here, you can just fold it in the centre of the seam. If you are not overlocking your pieces together and you are using a sewing machine, trim all of your seam allowances to about half and then just press open. Fold your entire piece in half with wrong sides facing, then match up the raw edges of the neckband the whole way around and press into place. As you do this, gently pull on the outer raw edge to create a flat circular piece. You'll notice if you gently stretch the raw edge as you press but you don't pull the inner folded edge, your neckband will start to become a little more flat and will curve. You might need to work with it a little, but eventually it will start to take on a nice curved shape. It doesn't need to be completely flat, but by doing this it will help it to lie a little nicer on the neck as we wear it, and will also make it a little bit easier to attach to the rest of the sweatshirt. Once you've done this, divide your neckband into quarters and mark each quarter point with a pin. Your seam line will be your first point. Then head back over to your sweatshirt and mark the centre point of the back neckline. Then use this point to divide the rest of the neckline into quarters. Pin the raw edge of the neckband onto the neckline, starting with the seam of your neckband matching up with your centre back point of your neckline. Then match up the rest of the quarter points of both the sweatshirt neckline and neckband. Once your quarter points are pinned in place, pin the rest of the neckline onto the neckband evenly in between the points. Starting at one of the shoulder points, sew the neckband onto the neckline, slightly stretching the neckband as you go to encourage it to fit onto the neckline. When doing this, I would recommend keeping your neckband on top. This is because it is much easier to have the fabric you are easing in on the bottom, as the feed dogs will pull that fabric through and help with easing. This is especially true on an overlocker, and your differential feed has been ingested to help with this, but the same is also true with a stand-up sewing machine. Whenever you ease anything in, have the piece with the excess fabric on the bottom. Press the entire neckline, making sure you press your seams towards the rest of the sweatshirt. We'll now repeat these steps to sew our waistband onto the waist of our sweatshirt, but this time you don't need to stretch out the waistband and curve it. You can do a little bit if your fabric isn't particularly stretchy, just to help with easing it onto the waist of the sweatshirt, but you should be fine without. We'll also do exactly the same with our cuffs, so you may as well prep these now too. Again, keep the band on top and stretch your band as you sew to make it fit. Your feed dogs will help with easing it in. Press your waist seam up towards the sweatshirt and away from the band. Your cuffs are probably the most difficult to ease in, as they're much smaller and harder to manage when sewing. Still, try and keep your cuff on top as you sew to help with this. I'll do one cuff with it on top and one with it on the bottom to show you the difference. Here you can see the one where I sewed with the cuff on top. It's nicely eased in with no tucks. This is one I sewed the other way. It was much harder to control the fabric here, and so I have tucks in the seam. I hope you enjoyed this video and thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next one.